All right, fabulous. We're in the last unit now. This is the factor market unit for AP microeconomics. We've been talking about the product markets up to this point in economics in our supply and demand unit and in the perfectly competitive market unit and in our imperfectly competitive market unit. We've been focusing on the products, the goods and the services that the producers have been producing. Now we're going to take a look behind that. We're going to look at the resources market, the resources, the supply and the demand for the resources that we use to make those goods and services. So the four factors of production, or the four resources that we use to produce those goods and services. So as a refresher, here are your four resources: labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. And let's talk, refresh our memory as well as what are the payments to these four factors of production? Well, when I work, the payment for my work or my labor is my wage. The payment for land, when I allow somebody else to use my land, is rent. These are kind of obvious ones. These are simple. The payment for capital is a little bit more complicated to understand or see how this works. One of the ways we can look at this is capital. If you remember, these are the tools, the machinery that allows us to produce a good or a service, or an office space, or a factory space. So the capital is the tool, the machinery that is purchased by a producer to produce a good or a service. So when a business is ready to purchase capital, it oftentimes, because these are expensive, will oftentimes go to the bank to get a loan to purchase the capital. When a bank lends money, where did the bank get the money? The bank gets money by people like you and me, savers, who deposit money into the bank. What do savers expect when I put money in the bank? I expect when I save money in the bank, I expect to be paid interest. And so this becomes the payment for capital. If we were not saving money, then banks would not have money to lend to businesses to purchase capital goods. So the payment for capital goods is interest. And finally, the payment for entrepreneurship is profit. Some people leave off entrepreneurship as a factor of production. We won't focus a lot on this one. So what ensures that workers were needed, the workers needed to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina in 2005 arrived? Did the government need to direct these workers to this area, or would there be some sort of market forces that would also encourage workers to move to these areas to rebuild after the hurricane? In 2005, the national wage growth rate was 6%, but in the affected areas of the hurricane, wages rose by somewhere between 8 and 12%. So naturally, what do workers do? Workers would gravitate towards those higher wages or higher wage growth areas. And so we saw that the workers needed after the rebuilding, in part, are directed by market forces to the region, attracted there by higher wages. What's this concept of derived demand? Derived demand is demand for a factor of production is derived from that demand's output. It's pretty simple. If education, it becomes a popular product, or there's high demand for education, well, then there's a high demand for educators. And many of you are thinking about this as you're thinking about future employment in your life. Maybe you're thinking, what career field should I go into? And maybe you're trying to select a career field where you know that the product will be in high demand. Because if the product is in high demand, so therefore will be the demand for your labor services. And these need not all be college educated jobs. We still have high demand for people to repair our cars, or high demand for plumbers and electricians. And so we see that those are good occupations. We have high demand for medical services. So anything in the medical field, labor markets are solid choices for careers as well. So demand for product then increases the demand for the resources. Derived demand. It's pretty simple. Here is a look back at a production function. We're on the x-axis down here. We're adding workers. And as we add workers, we produce more product. The production of the product rises. As you can see, it starts to flatten here. What's causing this flattening of the total product curve? Diminishing marginal product. When the next worker produces less than the previous worker. So we can see here that the first worker produced 19 units for my wheat production. The second worker produced 17. The third worker produced 15, so on and so forth. We're experiencing diminishing marginal product. The next worker is producing less than the previous. Why? A shortage of capital, running out of equipment, tools, limited space. So how many workers should they hire, knowing that the next worker is less productive than the previous worker? At what point do I say, I don't want to hire that worker? They're not valuable enough to me to hire that worker because they're producing less than the previous worker. So we need this idea of marginal revenue product. So George and Martha, from employing another worker, what is the dollar value of that extra output? Extra output being marginal product. What is the dollar value of the marginal product that they're producing? We call this marginal revenue product. The income, the revenue from the production of the next worker. So not the income to the worker, but the income to the business. What additional income will this worker generate for my business? How many units will they produce for me, right? And how much can I sell them for? That's going to help me figure out how much additional revenue they're going to bring into the business. So we have a situation here where we have workers are paid $200. Every time I hire another worker, I pay him $200. And wheat sells for $20. How many workers should we hire? So we're going to pay $200 a day for the worker. This is how much wheat they can produce in a day. How many workers should we go about hiring? And so you need to calculate the marginal revenue product and then use that information to figure out how many workers we should hire. So pause the video, think about this for a while. You have enough information here. You know the physical product that they're making. You know how much the product sells for. So you ought to be able to figure out how much revenue that worker would generate for the business. And then you could use that to compare it to what you're paying them. Pause, fill this out, and then come back. All right, so if you were logical here, you thought, well, I know the physical product they're making. If they're making 19 units and I can sell each of these for $20, then that would be $380 worth of revenue or income that he would generate for the business. So I would hire all of these workers up through worker number 5 because they bring in more revenue to the business. The revenue or income they generate for the business is greater than what I had to pay them, the $200. But I would not hire worker number 6 because he doesn't generate enough revenue for the business compared to the wage that I have to pay them. So it's a really simple idea. If they generate more revenue for the business than the wage, hire them. If they don't generate enough revenue for the business or income compared to the wage, don't hire them. So this is the end for this part of the lesson. You'll have a second video here where we'll be graphing a perfectly competitive labor market. See you back here in a few seconds.